One more move, and neither money nor lies will save you.
The floorboards in our old colonial creaked like dying animals, so I heard every word through the thin walls at 3 a.m. My son Ross's voice, sharp with disgust. I bought that video from one of my classmates for $50. It's mom getting railed by some guy in a BMW. My daughter Amelia's response cut through me like a rusty blade. Delete it, you idiot! She's been cheating for 15 years. If dad dumps her now, forget college. The divorce will destroy him financially, and we'll be stuck with his pathetic life forever. I sat on the edge of my bed in boxers and a torn Red Sox shirt, staring at the water stain on our ceiling that looked like a middle finger. 47 years old, owner of Murphy's Auto Repair on the dying end of Main Street, and apparently the last honest man in Maple Hollow, Massachusetts. Also apparently the biggest fool. My wife Marta lay beside me, breathing the deep, satisfied sleep of someone who just returned from another late client meeting at the law office where she managed files and evidently managed a lot more. Her auburn hair spread across the pillow like spilled wine, and even in the darkness I could smell expensive perfume that definitely wasn't the drugstore stuff I bought her for Christmas. 15 years. Jesus Christ. I slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen where I made coffee with hands that shook just enough to spill grounds on the counter. Through the window, I could see Jake Turnbull's house across the street, the real estate hotshot with his perfect lawn and his BMW parked in a pristine driveway. Jake, who'd been coming around for business dinners with Marta. Jake, who always seemed to know exactly when I'd be working late at the shop. The coffee tasted like ash, but I drank it anyway, planning my day around the new reality that my marriage was a 23-year joke and my kids saw me as a financial liability. I built Murphy's Auto from nothing, worked 16-hour days to keep this family comfortable, and somehow become the villain in my own story. By 6 a.m., I was dressed and heading to the shop, leaving Marta to her dreams of whatever fantasy life she'd constructed. The morning air bit through my jacket as I walked down Elm Street, past the abandoned storefronts and the coffee shop that had been temporarily closed for 3 years. Maple Hollow was dying the same slow death as my marriage. Both had been beautiful once. Both were rotting from the inside. Murphy's Auto sat between a vacant lot and Rosie's Diner, which still served decent coffee and the kind of gossip that kept small towns entertained. I unlocked the bay doors and fired up the space heaters, breathing in the familiar smell of motor oil and metal shavings. This place was honest work. When something was broken, you fixed it or admitted you couldn't. No lies, no pretense, no 15-year affairs with real estate agents who drove BMWs. My first customer was Mrs. Henderson, whose ancient Buick made sounds like a dying whale. As I popped the hood, she leaned against the workbench and fixed me with the predatory stare of a woman who lived for other people's misery. Tom, honey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I saw Marta at the Lakeside Inn last Tuesday night. She was with that handsome Jake Turnbull, and they looked mighty cozy. I kept my eyes on the engine, checking belts and hoses with deliberate care. Marta works with Jake sometimes. Legal stuff for his real estate deals. Oh, I'm sure that's what they call it these days. Mrs. Henderson's laugh sounded like breaking glass. Though I have to say, she looked absolutely radiant. New haircut, expensive dress. You're treating her well, Tom. Except I wasn't buying her expensive dresses or paying for new haircuts. My hands tightened on the wrench as I realized Jake probably was. I fixed Mrs. Henderson's Buick in 20 minutes and charged her half what the job was worth, just to get her out of my shop before I said something I'd regret. But as she drove away, her words echoed in my head alongside my kids' midnight conversation. 15 years, $50 videos, a BMW. The pieces clicked together like a transmission falling into place. That evening, I came home to find Marta in the kitchen wearing a black dress that probably cost more than I made in a week. She was checking her phone with the focused intensity of someone coordinating secret meetings. "Another client dinner?" I asked, opening a beer and leaning against the counter. She looked up, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance at being interrupted. "Mr. Dillman wants me to handle the Morrison property deal. It's complicated, lots of moving parts." "Jake's involved, I assume?" "Of course, he's the listing agent." She slipped her phone into her purse, a designer bag I'd never seen before. "Don't wait up. These things run late." I watched her leave, noting how she avoided eye contact and how her heels clicked against the hardwood with the confidence of a woman who had somewhere important to be, someone important to see. After she left, I searched the house with the methodical approach I used for diagnosing engine problems. I found the burner phone in her jewelry box, hidden beneath a tangle of earrings I'd never seen her wear. The message history made my stomach turn, explicit photos, detailed plans for hotel meetings and conversations that went back years. Jake's contact name in the phone was Daddy. I sat on our bed, scrolling through evidence of my wife's double life, feeling something cold and sharp settling in my chest. The messages were graphic, passionate, and frequent. They talked about me like I was an obstacle, a boring necessity they had to work around. In one exchange, Marta complained about having to play housewife while Jake promised to take her away from all this small-town bullcrap. The most recent messages mentioned the Lakeside Inn, room 237, and plans for the following night. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, finished my beer, and made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules. If they thought I was too stupid or too honest to fight back, they were about to discover how wrong they could be. The next evening, I told Marta I was working late on a transmission job and watched her leave for another client dinner. Then I climbed into my pickup truck and followed her BMW through the winding roads that led to Lakeside Inn, a fancy resort where rooms cost more than most people in Maple Hollow made in a week. The Lakeside Inn parking lot was designed for discretion, dimly lit with plenty of secluded spots where a cheating wife could park her BMW without being seen from the road. I found a position behind a maintenance shed where I could watch the main entrance and settled in for what I hoped would be a short surveillance mission. Marta arrived first, walking through the lobby with the confident stride of someone who'd done this many times before. She wore the black dress from the night before and carried an overnight bag I'd never seen. 20 minutes later, Jake's silver BMW pulled up to the valet stand. Jake Turnbull stepped out like he owned the place, 6 feet tall, perfectly styled hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He was handsome in the artificial way of men who spent serious money on their appearance, and as I watched him stride through the lobby, I understood why my wife had chosen him over me. I sat in my truck for 3 hours, taking pictures with my phone and making notes about times and license plates. The rational part of my brain kept insisting this was enough evidence, that I should go home and confront Marta with what I'd discovered. But the angry part, the part that had been growing stronger since Mrs. Henderson's gossip and my kids' midnight conversation, wanted more. I wanted to see their faces when they realized they'd been caught. At 11:30, I walked into the lobby and told the desk clerk I was supposed to meet my wife in room 237, but had forgotten my key. The kid behind the counter looked nervous, probably sensing something dangerous in my expression, but he made the call. "Mrs. Murphy, your husband is here." "Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am." He hung up and gave me a look that mixed pity with professional discretion. "She says she'll be right down." I waited in the lobby, admiring the fake rustic decor, and wondering how many other marriages had ended in this overpriced monument to adultery. When the elevator doors opened, Marta stepped out alone, her hair disheveled, and her dress slightly wrinkled. She saw me and went pale, her hand instinctively moving to smooth her appearance. "Tom, what are you doing here?" "Looking for my wife." I kept my voice calm, conversational. "Funny thing, I called the law office and they said you left at 5. No client dinner scheduled tonight." She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my phone, showing her one of the photos I'd taken. "Nice BMW Jake's got. Bet it's fun to ride in." The color drained completely from her face. "Tom, let me explain." "No need. I found your other phone, read all the messages, saw the photos you've been sending to Daddy." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. 15 years, Marta. That's what Amelia said. 15 years of this." Her composure cracked, and I saw the real woman underneath. Not the devoted wife and mother she'd been pretending to be, but someone cold and calculating who'd been playing a long game I was too honest to recognize. "The kids know?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Ross bought a video of you from one of his classmates. $50 for a footage of his mother getting screwed by her boyfriend. How's that for family bonding?" She started to cry, but they were the wrong kind of tears. Not remorse, but frustration at being caught. "Tom, please, we can work this out. I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can. You've had 15 years of practice." I turned toward the door, then paused. "By the way, tell Jake I slashed 2 of his tires. Seemed like the neighborly thing to do." I left her standing in the lobby and walked out to the parking lot where Jake was indeed standing beside his BMW, staring at two flat tires with the expression of a man whose perfect evening had just been ruined. When he saw me, his face went through several interesting changes: confusion, recognition, and finally fear. "You son of a bitch," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the cops. Go ahead. Tell them you were screwing my wife in a hotel room while I was vandalizing your car. I'm sure that'll go over well with your real estate clients." I walked past him toward my truck, then stopped. "Oh, and Jake? Next time you want to play house with someone else's wife, maybe don't do it in a town where everyone knows everyone else's business." I drove home through empty streets, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of power, of taking control instead of just accepting whatever life handed me. The anger was still there, burning in my chest like swallowed gasoline, but now it had direction and purpose. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet. Ross and Amelia were presumably asleep, dreaming whatever dreams 20-somethings had when their family was imploding. I sat at the kitchen table and made a list of everything I knew, everything I'd discovered, and everything I planned to do about it. Marta came home at 2 a.m., slipping through the door like a teenager breaking curfew. I was waiting in the living room, sitting in my recliner with a beer and the burner phone on the table beside me. "We need to talk," she said. "No, we don't. We needed to talk 15 years ago before you started screwing Jake Turnbull. Now we need to figure out how to end this marriage without destroying what's left of our kids' respect for either of us." She sat on the couch, maintaining the distance between us that had apparently been there all along. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You've been cheating on me for 15 years, spending money we don't have on clothes and hotels and God knows what else, while I worked 16-hour days to keep this family afloat." I picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages. "According to this, you've been planning to leave me as soon as the kids graduate college. Very considerate. Tom, please. The only thing I want to hear from you is how we're going to handle this. Do you want to file for divorce, or should I?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Harder, more honest than I'd heard it in years. "I want half of everything. The house, the business, the retirement accounts, and I want alimony." I almost laughed. "You want me to pay you for cheating on me? I want what I'm entitled to after 23 years of marriage." "What you're entitled to is a kick in the ass and a one-way ticket out of town." I stood up, suddenly exhausted. "But we'll let the lawyers figure that out. In the meantime, you can sleep in the guest room." She nodded and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with my beer and my anger and the growing realization that this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the whole town would know. Mrs. Henderson would spread the news like wildfire, and by noon, everyone in Maple Hollow would be talking about Tom Murphy, the poor bastard whose wife had been cheating on him for 15 years. But as I sat in my recliner, planning my next moves, I realized something important. I didn't care what they thought anymore. For the first time in decades, I was going to stop being the nice guy, the honest man, the fool who played by rules that nobody else followed. If they wanted a villain, I'd give them one worth talking about. Word traveled fast in Maple Hollow, especially when it involved sex, betrayal, and public humiliation. By the time I opened Murphy's Auto the next morning, half the town already knew about my midnight confrontation with Marta and Jake at the Lakeside Inn. Mrs. Henderson was my first customer again, practically vibrating with excitement as she brought me a coffee and a Danish from Rosie's Diner. "Tom, honey, I heard about last night. The whole town's buzzing. Jake Turnbull's telling everyone you're crazy, that you attacked him for no reason." She leaned closer, her eyes bright with malicious glee. "But between you and me, everyone knew about him and Marta. We just didn't know how to tell you." I accepted the coffee, but not the sympathy. "Appreciate the heads up, Mrs. H. Little late, but I appreciate it. What are you going to do?" "Fix cars, same as always." But that wasn't entirely true. While I worked on Mrs. Henderson's Buick, I was also planning my next move. The confrontation at the hotel had been satisfying, but it was just the opening shot. If Marta wanted half of everything I'd built, she was going to have to fight for it. And if Jake thought he could steal my wife and then play victim when I fought back, he was about to learn how wrong he could be. My phone buzzed with a text from Ross. "Dad, we need to talk. Coming by the shop at lunch." An hour later, both my kids walked through the bay doors looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Ross had inherited my dark hair and stocky build, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never had to work with his hands for a living. Amelia looked like her mother, tall, elegant, with auburn hair and green eyes that could cut glass when she was angry. They were both angry now. "Dad, what the hell did you do last night?" Amelia's voice could have stripped paint. I wiped my hands on a rag and gave them my full attention. "I caught your mother cheating and confronted her about it. What did you think I should do?" "Handle it privately," Ross said, "not turn it into a public spectacle. Do you have any idea how this affects us?" "How it affects you?" I felt the anger rising again, hot and sharp. "Your mother's been screwing Jake Turnbull for 15 years, spending money we don't have on her boyfriend while I worked my ass off to pay for your college, and you're worried about how her getting caught affects you?" "We knew about Mom," Amelia said quietly. "We've known for years." "And you never thought to mention it?" "What were we supposed to say?" Ross's voice cracked slightly. "Hey, Dad, Mom's cheating, but we need you to stay married until we graduate so our lives don't get screwed up." The honesty was brutal, but I respected it more than any lies they could have told. "So what's the plan now? I'm supposed to pretend nothing happened so you can finish college?" "We're supposed to be adults about this," Amelia said. "Quiet divorce, split everything fairly. Move on with our lives, not whatever this is." "This is me finally standing up for myself, something I should have done 15 years ago." "This is you being selfish," she shot back. "Mom made mistakes, but she's still our mother. And now the whole town thinks she's some kind of whore because you couldn't handle your business privately." The word hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how completely my own children had chosen sides without me realizing there was a war going on. "Your mother made choices," I said carefully. "For 15 years, she chose to lie to me, to steal from our family, to humiliate me in front of the whole town. I didn't make her do any of that. And now you're making choices too," Ross said. "Bad ones." They left without saying goodbye, and I spent the rest of the afternoon working on a transmission rebuild, trying to lose myself in the honest complexity of gears and hydraulics. But my phone kept buzzing with messages, some from friends offering support, others from people who'd apparently decided I was the villain in this story. The most interesting message came from Jake Turnbull himself. "We need to talk. Neutral ground. Rosie's Diner. 6 p.m. I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. At 6 o'clock, I walked into Rosie's Diner and found Jake sitting in a back booth, looking like a man who'd spent the day getting advice from expensive lawyers. He'd traded his usual designer suit for jeans and a polo shirt, probably trying to look more relatable. "Tom, thanks for coming." I slid into the booth across from him and signaled Rosie for coffee. "This should be interesting." "Look, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we need to figure out how to handle this situation like adults. Adults don't screw other men's wives for 15 years. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Marta and we fell in love. It wasn't planned." 15 years wasn't planned. Hotel rooms and burner phones and secret bank accounts weren't planned. I leaned forward. "Jake, I've seen the messages. You two were planning to wait until my kids graduated, then divorce me and take half my business. That sounds pretty damn planned to me." "We never wanted to hurt you. You just wanted to steal from me quietly." Rosie brought my coffee and retreated quickly, sensing the tension. Jake waited until she was gone, then leaned closer. "Here's what's going to happen. Marta's filing for divorce. You're going to cooperate, split things fairly, and we're all going to move on with our lives. No more public scenes, no more vandalism, no more drama." "Or what? Or I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you really are. The drinking, the gambling, the times you hit Marta." I was out of the booth and around the table before he could finish the sentence, grabbing him by his polo shirt and hauling him to his feet. The diner went quiet, every conversation stopping as the other customers turned to watch. "I never hit my wife, you lying piece of crap. I don't gamble, and I have maybe 3 beers a week." I shoved him back into the booth hard enough to rattle the table. "But if you want to see what kind of man I really am, keep talking." Jake straightened his shirt, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Everyone saw that, Tom. Everyone saw you lose control and attack me for no reason." I looked around the diner at the faces staring back at me, some shocked, some disapproving, some quietly approving. Mrs. Henderson was in her usual corner booth, taking notes like a war correspondent. Good, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Let them see. Let them know that Tom Murphy finally got tired of being the town fool. I threw a $5 bill on the table for the coffee and walked out, leaving Jake to explain to a room full of witnesses why he'd just tried to blackmail a man whose wife he'd been screwing for 15 years. As I drove home, I realized that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The old Tom Murphy, the one who fixed cars and paid his bills and trusted his wife, was gone. In his place was someone harder, angrier, and a lot less concerned about what other people thought. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. But it was going to be fought on my terms, with my rules, and I was just getting started. The next morning brought an unwelcome surprise. Marta's sister Victoria sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, and looking like she'd rather be performing surgery without anesthesia. Victoria was everything Marta pretended to be: successful, sophisticated, and genuinely intimidating. She worked as a financial advisor in Boston, drove a Mercedes, and had never made any secret of the fact that she thought her sister had married beneath her station. Tom. She didn't get up or offer any pleasantries. We need to discuss this situation. Your sister's cheating is a situation now. Your reaction to it is... Victoria pulled out her phone and showed me a video that made my blood run cold. It was security footage from Rosie's diner showing me grabbing Jake and shoving him back into the booth. This is attack, Tom. Jake could press charges. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her, trying to project calm I didn't feel. Jake's not going to press charges. He doesn't want the attention. Maybe not, but this video is already making the rounds on social media. Local Facebook groups, Twitter, everywhere. You're becoming famous, Tom. The crazy husband who can't handle his wife leaving him. She swiped to another screen, showing me a Facebook post from someone I'd never heard of. Tom Murphy from Murphy's Auto completely lost it at Rosie's last night, attacked Jake Turnbull for no reason. This guy is dangerous. The comments were brutal. People I'd known for years, customers whose cars I'd fixed, neighbors I'd helped with everything from jump starts to moving furniture. They were all talking about me like I was some kind of unhinged psychopath. Here's what's going to happen, Victoria continued. Marta's filing for divorce today. You're going to agree to a fair settlement. Half the house, half your business assets, reasonable alimony. In return, she won't pursue charges for stalking, maltreatment, or domestic violence. Domestic violence? I almost laughed. I never touched your sister. You followed her to a hotel. You vandalized Jake's car. You physically attacked him in a public place. Victoria's voice was crisp, professional. A good lawyer could make a very convincing case that you're escalating towards serious violence. And what about 15 years of adultery? What about the money she's been stealing from our joint accounts to pay for hotel rooms and designer clothes? Adultery isn't illegal in Massachusetts, and Marta has every right to spend money from joint accounts. I stared at her, realizing that this conversation had been planned, probably scripted by lawyers who specialized in destroying men like me. You've been helping her, haven't you? All these years, you knew what she was doing. Victoria's expression didn't change. I've been helping my sister navigate an unhappy marriage with a man who couldn't provide the life she deserved. The life she deserved. I repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitterness. What life was that, Victoria? The one where she gets to screw around while I work 16-hour days to pay for it? The one where she doesn't have to pretend to be satisfied with a small-town mechanic who peaked in high school? The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and leave scars. But instead of hurting me, it clarified something important. This wasn't just about Marta's affair. This was about class, about status, about people who thought they were better than me deciding to take what I'd built. Get out of my house. Tom, get out, now, before I do something that really gives you grounds for a lawsuit. Victoria gathered her things with deliberate calm, but I caught a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Maybe she was realizing that the small-town mechanic might be more dangerous than she'd calculated. You have 48 hours to accept the settlement offer, she said from the doorway. After that, things get much more complicated. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list of everyone who was working against me. Marta, Jake, Victoria, probably half the town based on the social media posts. Then I made a list of people who might still be on my side. It was a much shorter list, but as I stared at the names, I realized something important. I didn't need a lot of allies. I just needed the right ones. People who understood loyalty, who valued honesty, who might be willing to help a man fight back against people who thought they could destroy him without consequences. I picked up my phone and started making calls. The first was to Sal Benedetto, who owned the boxing gym where I worked out 3 times a week. Sal was 65, built like a fire hydrant, and had been running the gym since before I was born. He'd seen every kind of human drama, and he didn't judge people based on their mistakes. "Tom, you crazy bastard. Heard you finally grew some balls." "Sal, I need a favor. You still got connections with people who know things? People who can find information?" "Depends what kind of information, and depends why you need it." I told him about the divorce, about Victoria's threats, about the social media campaign that was painting me as an unstable stalker. When I finished, Sal was quiet for a long moment. "These people think they're smart, Tommy, but smart people make mistakes too. Give me a few days, I'll see what I can find." The second call was to Danny Kowalski, who owned the auto parts store and had been my friend since high school. Danny was the kind of guy who remembered every favor, every slight, every piece of gossip that passed through his shop. "Danny, I need to know everything you can find out about Jake Turnbull's business dealings. Real estate transactions, bank loans, anything that might be interesting." "You planning something stupid, Tom?" "I'm planning something smart, maybe for the first time in my life." The third call was to my accountant, a sharp woman named Carol who'd been handling my books for 10 years. I explained the situation and asked her to do a complete audit of all joint accounts, credit cards, and business expenses. "Tom, this is going to get ugly. Are you sure you want to go down this road? They started down this road 15 years ago. I'm just finally deciding to follow them." By the end of the day, I had a network of people working to uncover the truth about my wife's secret life and her boyfriend's business dealings. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, I drove to the gym and spent 2 hours hitting the heavy bag, working out 15 years of frustration and anger. Sal watched from his office, occasionally shouting advice about keeping my guard up and following through on my punches. When I was finished, he called me over and handed me a beer from the mini fridge he kept behind his desk. "Tommy, you remember what I taught you about fighting? Hit hard, hit first, don't stop until the other guy stays down." That's part of it. But the most important thing is knowing when you're in a fight. Some guys, they get sucker punched, and they still think they're having a conversation. They try to be reasonable with people who are trying to destroy them. He pointed at the heavy bag I'd been pounding. "You've been getting sucker punched for 15 years. Question is, are you finally ready to fight back, or are you still trying to be reasonable?" I finished my beer and looked at the old man who'd taught me more about life than my own father ever had. "Sal, I think I'm done being reasonable." "Good. Because from what you've told me, these people aren't interested in being fair. They want to take everything you've built and make you grateful for the privilege. So, what do I do?" Sal smiled, and I saw something predatory in his expression. "You learn everything you can about them. Their secrets, their weaknesses, their pressure points. And then you use that information to make them wish they'd never heard your name." I drove home through the quiet streets of Maple Hollow, past Jake's house with its perfect lawn and dark windows, past the law office where Marta had spent 15 years planning my destruction, past all the places where I'd been living a lie without knowing it. But I wasn't the same man who'd driven these streets the week before. That man had been honest, trusting, naive. This man was learning to be something else entirely, something his enemies were going to regret creating. 3 days later, Sal called with the first piece of interesting information. "Tommy, your boy Jake's got some problems. Real estate business isn't as clean as it looks." We met at the gym after hours when the place was empty except for the smell of sweat and the echo of old fights. Sal had a manila folder thick with papers, and his expression was grimmer than usual. "Jake Turnbull's been running a side business for the past 5 years. Buys properties cheap from desperate sellers, flips them fast, doesn't always disclose problems to the new buyers. Nothing technically illegal, but definitely shady." He handed me a stack of documents, complaints filed with the state real estate board, angry letters from buyers who'd discovered foundation problems or electrical issues after closing, records of lawsuits that had been quietly settled. "Gets better. 3 of those properties, your wife handled the legal paperwork, filed documents, processed payments, made sure everything looked legitimate." I stared at the papers, seeing Marta's signature on dozens of documents. She was helping him cheat people. More than that. Look at this. Sal pulled out a bank statement with several names blacked out. Joint account opened 2 years ago. Jake and Marta, equal partners. They've been splitting profits from these deals 50-50. The numbers were staggering, Over 2 years, they'd made almost $200,000 from their real estate scheme. Money that had never appeared in our joint accounts. Money that Marta had been hiding while I struggled to pay for our kids' college and keep the business running. There's more, Sal continued. Jake's married, wife lives in Connecticut, thinks he's working in Boston most of the time. She's got no idea about the Maple Hollow operation or your wife. I looked up from the papers. He's cheating on his wife with my wife? Looks like it. And get this, Jake's wife is loaded. Family money, trust fund, the works. If she finds out about his side business and his girlfriend, Jake loses everything. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Really smiled. Not the bitter grimace I'd been wearing since this started. Sal, you beautiful bastard, how did you get all this? I know people who know people, and I know how to ask the right questions. He leaned back in his chair. Question is, what are you going to do with it? I gathered the papers and slipped them back into the folder. I'm going to give Jake and Marta a chance to be reasonable, and if they're not interested in being reasonable, I'm going to make their lives very complicated. The next morning, I called Jake's office and left a simple message. We need to talk, today. Your choice where, but it's happening. He called back an hour later, his voice tight with anxiety. Tom, I don't think we have anything to discuss. We have plenty to discuss. Like your real estate business, your joint account with my wife, and your other wife in Connecticut. Pick a place, Jake. Somewhere private. There was a long silence. Murphy's Auto, 1 hour. He arrived in a different car, a black Audi instead of the BMW, and looked like he'd aged 5 years since our confrontation at Rosie's. His perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled, and his hands shook slightly as he lit a cigarette. What do you want? I handed him photocopies of the bank statements and real estate documents. I want the truth, all of it. How long you've been stealing from people, how much money you and Marta have hidden, and what your wife in Connecticut knows about your operation here. Jake's face went white as he flipped through the papers. Where did you get this? Does it matter? What matters is what I do with it. I leaned against my workbench, enjoying his discomfort. See, Jake, I've been thinking about our conversation at Rosie's. You threatened to spread lies about me, make me look like some kind of abusive drunk. But I've got something better, the truth about you. Tom, listen. No, you listen. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer every penny from that joint account to my business account. You're going to end your relationship with my wife, and you're going to disappear from Maple Hollow. I can't do that. Sure you can. Because if you don't, I'm going to send copies of these documents to the State Real Estate Board, the IRS, and your wife in Connecticut. I'm also going to post them on every social media platform in town, along with photos of you and Marta at the Lakeside Inn. Jake dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. You're talking about extortion. I'm talking about consequences. Something you and my wife seem to have forgotten about. I picked up my phone and showed him a draft email with attachments ready to send. You've got 24 hours. Transfer the money, end the affair, leave town, or everyone finds out what kind of man you really are. And if I do what you want, then this stays between us. Clean slate, fresh start, everyone moves on with their lives. Jake stared at the phone screen, calculating odds and options. Finally, he nodded. 24 hours. 24 hours. After he left, I called Carol, the accountant, and asked her to monitor all accounts for unusual activity. Then I called Sal and told him to be ready. If Jake decided to fight instead of run, things were going to get complicated fast. That evening, Marta came home from another late night at the office and found me waiting in the living room with a glass of whiskey and a folder full of evidence. We need to talk, I said. She saw the folder and went very still. Tom, what is this? This is the end of your 15-year con game. Sit down. She sat on the edge of the couch, maintaining distance but unable to hide her fear. I opened the folder and spread out the documents like playing cards. Joint bank account with Jake, $200,000 in hidden profits, real estate fraud, a married boyfriend who's been lying to both of his wives. I looked up at her. Anything you want to add? Marta's composure finally cracked completely. Tom, I can explain. No explanations, just choices. You can cooperate with a reasonable divorce settlement, 50-50 split of legitimate assets, no alimony, joint custody of whatever relationship we can salvage with our kids. Or I can make all of this public and let you explain to everyone in town how you've been stealing from your neighbors while pretending to be a respectable wife and mother. You wouldn't do that. The old Tom wouldn't, but the old Tom was an idiot who trusted people who were robbing him blind. I closed the folder. The new Tom is a lot less concerned about being nice. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. What about Jake? Jake's got his own problems. I'd worry about yourself. Tom, I never meant for it to happen like this. But it did happen like this. For 15 years. I finished my whiskey and stood up. You've got until tomorrow night to decide. Reasonable settlement or public humiliation. Your choice. I left her sitting in the living room and went upstairs to the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping since the night I found her burner phone. As I lay in the dark, I thought about the man I'd been just a week ago. Trusting, hardworking, honest to a fault. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder and more pragmatic. Someone who understood that sometimes the only way to deal with people who didn't play by the rules was to stop playing by the rules yourself. Tomorrow, I'd find out if Jake and Marta were smart enough to take the deal I was offering. If not, I was ready for the next phase of the war they'd started 15 years ago. Either way, I was done being the fool in my own story. Jake transferred the money at 11:47 p.m., just 13 minutes before my deadline. $217,000 appeared in Murphy's auto business account, along with a brief note. As agreed, I'm leaving town tomorrow. I was sitting in my office at the shop, drinking coffee and watching the bank website refresh when the transfer went through. For a moment, I just stared at the number on the screen. More money than I'd ever seen in one place, stolen from my family over 2 years of secret deals and hidden partnerships. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Money's transferred. I'm done with Marta, done with Maple Hollow. We're even. I typed back. We're even when you're gone. 24 hours. The next morning brought unexpected complications. Marta was gone when I woke up, along with 2 suitcases and most of her clothes. She'd left a note on the kitchen table. Gone to Victoria's to think, need space to figure out what comes next. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Running to her sister was typical Marta, avoiding confrontation, letting someone else handle the difficult conversations, but it also meant she was probably planning something, getting advice from lawyers and financial advisors who specialized in protecting cheating wives from the consequences of their actions. My phone rang as I was getting ready for work, Ross's name on the caller ID. Dad, what did you do? Mom's at Aunt Victoria's crying and talking about lawyers. She says you threatened her. I gave her a choice, same choice I gave Jake. What choice? Reasonable settlement or public humiliation? She picked door number 3, running away. Dad, this is insane. You can't blackmail Mom into giving up her rights. I'm not blackmailing anyone. I'm offering her a fair deal based on legitimate assets, not money she stole while cheating on me. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Ross, your mother and Jake have been running real estate scams for 2 years. They've made over $200,000 cheating people in this town, money that should have gone toward your college, toward keeping this family together. Silence on the other end. Then, that's not possible. It's documented. Bank records, real estate transactions, complaints filed with the state. Your mother wasn't just cheating on me, Ross. She was stealing from our neighbors. I don't believe you. Then come by the shop. I'll show you the evidence. He hung up without answering, but I knew he'd be there within an hour. Ross had inherited my need to see proof, to understand how things worked. He wouldn't be able to resist looking at the documents. He arrived 45 minutes later, bringing Amelia with him. Both of my kids looked like they'd been arguing, and Amelia's eyes were red from crying. Show us, Ross said without preamble. I spread out the papers on my workbench, bank statements, real estate documents, complaint letters, records of lawsuits. I walked them through the scheme step by step, how Jake would identify desperate sellers, how Marta would handle the legal paperwork, how they'd flip properties without disclosing problems, how they'd split the profits through their secret account. Mrs. Patterson, I said, pointing to one complaint letter. Remember her? Used to bring you cookies when you were kids. Jake sold her a house with a cracked foundation and black mold in the basement. She lost her life savings and had to move in with her daughter. Amelia read the letter, her face growing pale. Mom knew about this? Mom processed the paperwork. Her signature's on every document. Ross was studying the bank statements, his accounting major training kicking in. This is a lot of money. Money that could have paid for your college without loans. Money that could have saved this marriage, this family. I gathered the papers back into the folder. Instead, it went to hotel rooms and designer clothes and whatever fantasy life your mother was building with Jake. What happens now? Amelia asked quietly. That depends on your mother. If she wants to be reasonable, we can end this quietly. If she wants to fight, I shrugged. Then everyone in town finds out what she's been doing. You'd really destroy her like that. Ross's voice was sharp with accusation. She destroyed herself. I'm just deciding whether to help her cover it up or let people see who she really is. They left without saying goodbye, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. The certainty they'd had about their mother, about the family dynamics, was cracking. They were starting to understand that the story they'd been told, poor Marta trapped in a marriage with a small-town mechanic, wasn't the whole truth. That afternoon, Victoria called. Tom, we need to meet. This situation has gotten out of hand. Your sister made it complicated when she decided to run instead of being reasonable. She's scared. You've threatened her, extorted money from Jake, turned her own children against her. What did you expect? I expected her to act like an adult and take responsibility for her choices, but I guess that was too much to ask. Rosie's Diner, 1 hour. Come alone. I almost laughed. Victoria, I'm not the one who needs to worry about being alone. Your sister's the one who's been committing crimes. But I met her anyway, curious to see what kind of deal they'd try to offer. Victoria was waiting in the same booth where I'd confronted Jake, looking like she'd rather be negotiating corporate mergers than family drama. Here's what's going to happen, she said without preamble. Marta's filing for divorce in Connecticut, where she's established residency. Connecticut is more favorable to women in divorce proceedings. Marta doesn't live in Connecticut. She does now. I've got an apartment. She's got a job lined up with a law firm in Hartford. She's starting over. I signaled Rosie for coffee, buying time to think. Moving to Connecticut was smart. It would make the divorce more complicated, more expensive, harder for me to control. But it also meant abandoning Maple Hollow, admitting defeat, running away from the life she'd been trying to steal. What about the real estate fraud? The stolen money? What stolen money? Jake transferred funds from a legitimate business account to settle a debt. Nothing illegal about that. And the fraud complaints? Business disputes. Happens all the time in real estate. Victoria was good. She'd found ways to make everything look legitimate, to protect Marta from the worst consequences of her actions. But she'd also revealed something important. They were scared enough to run, to abandon their original plan of taking half my assets and staying in town. So, Marta gets to start over in Connecticut with a new job and a clean slate, while I get stuck with the mess she left behind. You get to keep your business, your house, and your reputation. Considering what you've done over the past week, that's generous. What I've done is fight back against people who were stealing from me. What you've done is commit extortion, maltreatment, and attack. Jake could still press charges. I leaned back in the booth, studying Victoria's face. She was bluffing. If Jake had wanted to press charges, he would have done it already. The fact that he'd transferred the money and was leaving town meant he was more afraid of exposure than interested in revenge. Here's my counteroffer, I said. Marta can go to Connecticut. She can start over, build whatever life she wants. But she doesn't get alimony, she doesn't get half my business, and she doesn't get to pretend she's the victim in this story. That's not acceptable. It's what's happening. She can file for divorce in Connecticut, Massachusetts, or Mars for all I care. But I've got enough evidence to make her life very complicated if she tries to take what I've built. Victoria gathered her papers and stood up. You're making a mistake, Tom. Marta has rights and she has resources. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's not over, but it's about to be. After she left, I sat in the diner for another hour, drinking coffee and thinking about the conversation. They were regrouping, planning their next move, probably consulting with expensive lawyers who specialized in protecting wealthy women from inconvenient husbands. But I had something they didn't expect. I was done caring about being the good guy, done worrying about what people thought, done trying to be reasonable with people who'd been unreasonable for 15 years. If they wanted to fight, I was ready. But it was going to be fought on my terms, with weapons they didn't know I possessed. The war was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Marta made her first mistake. She came back to Maple Hollow. I was working late at the shop when Danny Kowalski called with the news. Tom, your wife's at Jake's house. Saw her car in the driveway about an hour ago. I looked up from the engine I was rebuilding, pieces of my old life suddenly clicking into place like transmission gears. Jake's supposed to be gone. That's what I thought, but his BMW's there too, and the lights are on upstairs. I wiped my hands clean and grabbed my jacket. Danny, do me a favor, call Sal, tell him I might need backup. Tom, don't do anything stupid. I'm done doing stupid things. Now I'm going to do something smart. I drove to Jake's house slowly, thinking through possibilities and consequences. If Marta was there, it meant the Connecticut plan was either a bluff or had fallen through. If Jake was still in town, it meant he'd decided to fight instead of run. Either way, they'd broken the agreement we'd made, which meant I was free to break mine. I parked across the street and called Carol, the accountant. Carol, it's Tom. I need you to do something for me right now. Transfer all the money from the joint accounts to my business account, then close the joint accounts entirely. Tom, it's almost midnight. I know what time it is. Can you do it? Online banking, yes. But Tom, if Marta's planning to contest the divorce, she just voided our agreement. Move the money. Next, I called the State Real Estate Board's fraud hotline and left a detailed message about Jake Turnbull's business practices, including account numbers and property addresses. Then I called the IRS tip line and reported unreported income from real estate transactions. Finally, I called the Hartford law firm where Victoria claimed Marta had a job lined up. This is Tom Murphy. I need to speak to whoever handles employment background checks. I have information about a potential employee that you need to know about. The night security guard was helpful, but limited. He took my name and number and promised someone would call me first thing in the morning. I left a brief message. Marta Murphy has been involved in real estate fraud and is currently under investigation. You might want to reconsider her employment. By the time I finished making calls, lights were going off in Jake's house. I waited another hour, but neither Marta nor Jake appeared. They were probably planning their next move, figuring out how to salvage their scheme now that I'd started fighting back with their own tactics. I drove home and slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning brought chaos. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Victoria screaming about frozen accounts and canceled job offers. Then Ross demanding to know why his college account was suddenly empty. Then Amelia crying about her credit cards being declined. I let them all go to voicemail and drove to the shop, where Sal was waiting with coffee and a grim smile. Tommy, you beautiful crazy bastard. What did you do? I stopped playing defense. I unlocked the bay doors and fired up the space heaters. They wanted to fight dirty, so I'm fighting dirty. The whole town's talking. Jake's telling everyone you're trying to frame him for crimes he didn't commit. Marta's saying you've stolen money from your own kids. Let them talk. By tonight, everyone will know the truth. At noon, Mrs. Henderson brought me a sandwich and the latest gossip. Tom, honey, there are investigators at Jake's house. Real official-looking types with badges and everything. State Real Estate Board, probably, maybe IRS. And Marta's at the police station with Victoria. They're filing some kind of complaint against you. I almost laughed. Let me guess. Maltreatment, extortion, domestic violence. How did you know? Because it's all they've got left. When people get caught stealing, they always try to make the victim look like the criminal. That afternoon, Detective Ray Morrison came by the shop. Ray and I had gone to high school together, and he'd brought his car to me for 15 years. He looked uncomfortable as he pulled out his notebook. Tom, I've got to ask you some questions. Marta and her sister filed a complaint. They're saying you've been threatening them, stealing money, making their lives hell. Ray, you know me. Have I ever been violent? Ever been arrested? Ever caused trouble for anyone? No, but what? But now that my wife got caught cheating and stealing, I'm suddenly a dangerous criminal? Ray put away his notebook. Tom, off the record, half the town thinks Marta got what she deserved. But on the record, I've got to investigate these complaints. Investigate away. Check my bank records, my phone records, everything. You'll find that every penny I moved came from accounts that Jake and Marta were using to hide stolen money. What about the maltreatment allegations? I pulled out my phone and showed him the folder of evidence I'd compiled. Ray, take a look at this. Real estate fraud, unreported income, complaints from victims. Marta and Jake have been running scams for 2 years. Ray flipped through the documents, his expression growing more serious. Jesus, Tom, this is federal stuff. IRS, state investigators, the works. I know, I called them. You called them? Someone had to. These people were stealing from our neighbors, Ray. Mrs. Patterson, the Kowalski family, half a dozen others. Someone had to stand up for them. Ray handed back the phone. Tom, I've got to tell you, this complaint against you isn't going anywhere. Not with this kind of evidence against them. I figured, but be careful. Cornered animals do dangerous things. He left, and I spent the rest of the afternoon working on cars and waiting for the next shoe to drop. It came at closing time, when Jake's BMW pulled into my parking lot. Jake got out looking like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled, and his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. Tom, we need to end this. I thought we already did. You were supposed to be gone. Plans changed. Marta and we're going to fight this. All of it. I wiped my hands on a rag and gave him my full attention. Fight what? The evidence, the bank records, the complaints from people you cheated? We're going to prove you set us up. Planted evidence, manipulated documents, whatever it took to frame us. Jake, you're not that stupid. You know I don't have the skills or resources to manufacture 2 years of bank records and real estate documents. Then we're going to prove you extorted the money from me, threatened me, forced me to transfer funds under duress. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Jake, you recorded our conversation, didn't you? When I made the deal? His face went white. I figured you might. Smart move, actually. Except now you've got a recording of me offering you a reasonable way out of a bad situation. Not extortion, negotiation. Tom, here's what's really going to happen, Jake. The state investigators are going to find evidence of fraud. The IRS is going to find unreported income. Your wife in Connecticut is going to find out about your girlfriend and your side business. And everyone in Maple Hollow is going to know exactly what kind of man you are. Jake dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. What do you want? I want you gone, tonight. I want Marta to sign reasonable divorce papers, and I want both of you to disappear from my life forever. And if we don't, I smiled, and something in my expression made Jake take a step backward. Then, tomorrow morning, I'm going to post every document, every photo, every piece of evidence on every social media platform in 3 counties. I'm going to make sure everyone knows that Jake Turnbull and Marta Murphy are thieves who steal from their neighbors. You wouldn't do that to your own wife. Jake, my wife died 15 years ago. The woman calling herself Marta Murphy is just a stranger who's been stealing from my family. He stared at me for a long moment, then got back in his BMW and drove away. I watched his taillights disappear down Main Street and knew I'd never see him again. 3 hours later, Marta called. Tom, I'll sign the papers. Whatever you want, just please don't destroy me completely. Reasonable settlement, no alimony, joint custody of whatever relationship we can rebuild with our kids. Agreed. And Marta, if you ever come back to Maple Hollow, if you ever try to contact me again, if you ever cause problems for our kids, I'll finish what I started. She hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, I signed divorce papers that gave me everything I'd built and left Marta with enough money to start over somewhere else. The kids were angry, confused, hurt, but they were also starting to understand that their mother wasn't the victim they'd thought she was. Jake disappeared completely. His house went up for sale, his real estate license was revoked, and rumor had it that his wife in Connecticut had filed for divorce and frozen all his accounts. As for me, I kept Murphy's Auto, kept my house, kept my integrity. I'd learned that sometimes the only way to deal with people who don't play by the rules is to stop playing by the rules yourself. But I'd also learned that there's a difference between fighting back and becoming the thing you're fighting against. I'd walked right up to that line, but I hadn't crossed it. I was still the last honest man in Maple Hollow. I was just a lot less naive about what honesty sometimes required. 6 months later, I was closing up the shop when a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. Mrs. Patterson, whose house Jake had sold her with the cracked foundation and black mold. She got out slowly, using a cane she hadn't needed before the stress of losing her life savings had aged her 10 years and 6 months. Tom, I wanted to thank you. For what? Mrs. Patterson? For standing up, for fighting back, for making sure people knew the truth. She handed me an envelope. The state recovered some of my money, not all of it, but enough to help. I opened the envelope and found a check for $5,000. Money I'd never expected to see. Mrs. Patterson, this is too much. It's not enough. You saved this town from those people, Tom. You did what the rest of us were too scared to do. After she left, I sat in my office and looked at the check. It wasn't about the money. It was about vindication, about knowing that sometimes doing the right thing actually worked out. I deposited the check and drove home through the quiet streets of Maple Hollow, past Jake's empty house and the law office where Marta used to work, past all the places where I'd been living a lie without knowing it. But I wasn't the same man who'd driven these streets a year ago. That man had been trusting, naive, willing to be taken advantage of by people who mistook kindness for weakness. This man knew better. This man had learned that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become someone your enemies fear. I was still honest. I was still decent. But I was no longer anyone's fool, and in a world full of people like Jake and Marta, that made all the difference.